Hi, everyone. I'm going to do a tutorial, several tutorials in how to go about mastering an album in Wavelab. At the moment, I'm going to show you the main setup and how to go about it and file construction and stuff like that. So let me show you how this works in the first round. So if you receive from a client a file or several files for an album. In my case, I have a album here that's completely done, written, and mastered, mixed and mastered from myself, by myself. And there's a whole bunch of folders inside this one, but the whole album is called Life of the Daydreamer, which is already up on YouTube and Spotify and all those good things as well. But how the process goes about after writing the music, you start into the production of side of things, and now we have all the mixes over here, 12 tracks, and each one of these tracks has several of the mixes in it. For example, we have mix 1, mix 2, the orchestra mix, and a redone mix, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Keeping your sessions, or in this case, project files, organized is like super important. So you know where everything is and you don't get lost and stuff like that. I have several things. I also have the artwork, which will embed as metadata inside of Wavelab as the main cover. This would also be the CD cover if you want to call it that, but that's kind of the idea. We also have the scores of music in Cubase, and you can also do this in other DAWs like Pro Tools, where this is a live production for theater production where it can be performed by session musicians. And essentially in Cubase you would go to your MIDI instruments that you've written, that you've composed with, and you would go and export the XML from that and import it into your notation software of choice. In this case, I use Sibelius. From that, we essentially organize it into notation that a musician can use, in this case a classical pianist. This is for one of the pieces of music which we'll probably get into a bit later. And then we have videos, different music videos and promo videos and things like that. We have scripts and the screenplay and the stage script and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very large body of work that we have to master. So once I've done these mixes, then I will copy each one. In Pro Tools, you would do a session backup or a copy in and put it somewhere else. In Cubase, you would use the backup project function. And then I've got my final mixes over here. We have 3 different things in here. I have final mix notes that I made, and I've got different engineers to listen to the music and say, what do you think needs fixing? What do you think I should do? Blah, blah, blah. And I wouldn't say I use all of their advice. It would just be an idea of, do they say the same things? For example, all 5 of them said the vocal was too quiet in one of the mixes, and I had to bring those up and fixes like that. Because sometimes when you're working for a long time on the same projects, you tend to lose track of what things are supposed to sound like, especially when it's your own music. Inside the final mixes file, we have the actual final mixes. Again, these are the same sessions, and these are just the final sessions that we are working with. Then we have the Atmos mixes, and if I get inspired, I might do a whole tutorial on how to do Atmos mixes on a smaller budget, because these things can get quite expensive, especially if you consider on DistroKid it costs $24 per Atmos mix to upload. You kind of want these things to be good. Then these are the Atmos breakdowns, which will take a while because they're huge files. These are not the ADM files. These are just binaural breakdowns of all the tracks. I've done 9 out of the 12 so far. And then once we have done with the final mixes, we have our master file. And I use a standard protocol in Wavelab where Wavelab doesn't build your sessions for you like Pro Tools or Cubase does. You'll have to build them yourselves. In here, I'll have my mixes, the original mixes that it takes a while because they're huge files. The original mixes that have been done, and then over here we have revised mixes. So these are the mixes after the final mix was done, and then revised mixes. I have mixes that I redid, and there's a long story behind these, but I'm not going to get into that. Then obviously we need to get the bounces that we're going to get our masters for, and we are going to master specifically for Spotify and online distribution. And the reason for that is because I'm not planning on printing CDs for this anytime in the next foreseeable future. So I might do CDs when the actual production is done. At that point, I'll make a new montage, which I'll talk about in a second. And then these are the two that I'll do. The MP3s, just for spreading around for two people to have a listen to, where the waves will be the actual distribution. We have a 96 kilohertz render. This is for the single that has been released. The 96 kilohertz render is an upsampled render of the master file for this first render. For a single, it's the master in high definition, whereas in an album, I'll use this, which I'll do a bit later, to render out the first version of the 96 kilohertz render and then build a new montage. And speaking of a montage, we have a montages folder. Inside the montage, we have the session, if you want to call it that. And here's the single that has been released already. And then I'm now doing the entire master, and you'll see that it's labeled in a very specific way. I have the name of the album and then the type of conversion we have. In our case, we have a 96 sample rate or 96 kilohertz sample rate, high definition, and 64-bit float. Some interfaces can't go up into high definition, so just make sure that if you do have an interface that you work in, make sure that it can handle high definition. If you don't, then don't work in high definition. And this is a digital master, and it's the first version. And I have a little underscore at the end to say that it's still in quality control state, which we'll talk about in a second. Once this is done, I will remove that underscore and then do the final master. And then that'll be it. Cool, so that is that. So now what we can do is jump into Wavelab. I'm going to first go through the process of setting up a Wavelab session. So I'm not going to save this for now because I've already done this, and I'm just going to show you how you get to the point where you can actually start mastering. So I'm going to start a new empty, and this is Wavelab. What you can see at the moment is that on my main screen we have this is not the default layout. There are some layouts that it's fairly close to the default, but we have the master section over here, which we'll talk about in a second, and we have different meterings and project manager views and stuff like that over here. But when you first get started, this area is going to be the most important. On the second screen, we have different meterings. I use all the default meterings that are in Wavelab. We have a spectrum meter over here, a loudness, peak loudness over here. It shows us a true peak. There's live spectrogram and a level meter on the left and right pan. And we have a phase scope, which shows us the phase correlation between the left and the right speakers. And then we have a waveform. This one is part of Supervision, which is the default metering software that you get with Steinberg Pro versions. And now if I go look at the main screen again, in the master section, when you're doing a whole album, it's not a thing you want to use because it applies to everything. And when you close it, it reopens. And it's just not a very easy way to control things when you're mastering stuff. So what I like to do is I use the master section for my different type of softwares that I use. For example, I have over here, we have mastering the mix referencing software. Wavelab does have referencing tracks in it that I can show you a bit later, but essentially this is what I use for referencing, just because it can show me the Trinity display, which allows me to see the different, the difference between width, the difference between EQ differences. I can't think of the word at the moment, but EQ differences essentially to kind of reference what you want going for. You don't need to use it. I just use it for what I like to use. Then also I have Sound ID reference in here where I have different headphone portfolios. If you don't have a mastering studio and it's not set up correctly, you will have the issue where your headphones will sound different from someone else's. In mastering, I actually keep this off because I want it to sound, and I'll go listen to it on and off, but when I'm actually mastering, I'll keep this off so I can get it to sound as good as it can on headphones. Should you master with headphones? Probably not, but not all of us have access to super cool studios. Right, so, and then at the bottom, I have my dither already here. Just talking about dither, you should know what a dither is. Essentially, it's a thing that changes the bit depth of something from one type of bit depth to another. If I look at my bit meter over here, you can see we have it up to 64-bit float, and we're working in a 96 kilohertz 64-bit float. And this will, a dither, when we activate it, which is bypassed at the moment, it'll cut it down to 24-bit, which is the standard for WAV files. And if you're doing MP3s, obviously you want a 16-bit, but MP3s obviously work at a CBR or constant bit rate or VBR, variable bit rate. This is the standard dither that comes with Steinberg, with Wavelab, is the Lin Pro, and it's made by Mart, which is really cool. Auto blanking essentially just blanks out the noise that it generates if there's no sound, which is what I always keep it on. Different dither types. I like it on triangle. I feel like the triangle doesn't interfere too much with the actual sound of the particular music that we're going to look at today because of the type of sound created. But if I'm doing something that isn't what I'm doing today, I'll go through the different dither types to make sure that it's not as intrusive as some other dithers can be. And then we get different types of weightings. Personally, I just keep it on second order. If you don't know about weightings, that's a very long, complicated thing to talk about, but I just keep it on second order. If you don't know, just do that. And there's the supervision at the bottom, which is on the second display. Right, so first of all, we need to import the audio, and we go to use a montage. You get two types of editing formats you can get. One is you can edit in a montage, or you can edit in the audio editor. And we like to, I would say I spend 99% of my time in the montage because the audio editor is destructive, where the montage is non-destructive. So I don't want to change the mix of the original file. I just want to master it. So let's start with a montage, and I'll show you the audio editor in a second. So easy enough. On the edit window, we just get a right click and you can go new active file, or you can just press the square over here and you want a new audio montage. If you are working with files that were recorded and mixed in 44.1, you would upsample to 88.2 to double it. If you're working in audio files that were recorded in 48 kilohertz samples, then I would upsample to 96. So, and obviously you can choose whether you're going to do a stereo mix. We go to do stereo, obviously. We get surround and ambisonics for immersive audio and stuff like that. Generally, we don't do this type of mastering, but we can, I guess. In Wavelab, it is a possibility. So I'm going to start with 96 because my music was recorded at 48.24. If you don't know what it was recorded at, there's this lovely little app called Media Info that you can get online. And if you grab a mix or just check the mixes, you can go grab it in here and check that it was written in 48 24-bit. So we are going to keep to that and say that is what we're working in. So these are the files we're going to import. Don't drag and drop. It's not that type of program. So we create a 96 and we're going to now right click on there, and we go to import our audio files, browse, file selector, and then we're going to go select our files. In my case, they're going to be in projects, compositions, like the Daydreamer, and master files, original mixes, and grab all of them. Boom. And now it's going to ask you to send us a mismatch samples. Do you want to upsample to 96? And we got to say yes. And then it's going to ask you to save. Now, this is an important thing. I've already saved it, so it's already in my compositions, live edition, master files, montages. I'm going to just, how you would name this is I generally name it after the album. So in this case, Life of the Daydreamer, and it's already there. You can see it, Life of the Daydreamer. And I will underscore this, and I will give it its sample rate. In our case, it's going to be 96 by 64 or 24-bit, depends how you want to do it, 64-bit float. And I'm going to call it a digital master because I'm going to not use, I'm not going to use analog gear. So digital master underscore V1 and underscore that. So this is going to indicate that I'm going to be in the quality control part of my master, where when I finish my quality control, I will remove this and that'll be it. So we go to save. It's going to open up how you want to order it. So I labeled mine track 1 all the way to 12. So it's already ordered it quite nicely. And it's giving us our 96 over there. We'll remove that a bit later, but that's okay. And now there's several ways you can figure this out. We go to type, we can order it by tracks or by lanes, or we can start on the start of the audio montage. I'll keep it there. But the layout is quite important. It says, do you want to line up the files on the active track? Or do you want to stagger? Or stagger means it's going to be up, down, up, down, up, down, where this is going to be right just next to each other. And you can stack a stack just means you got to have them on top of each other and then offset several tracks. This will be what you would call a ladder method, I guess, or a stair method, where you would do, if you're mastering not in Wavelab, you were mastering in Pro Tools, for example, you would probably do it this way because you can't stagger. You can't stagger in Pro Tools or Cubase. I think Wavelab, maybe some other software can do it, but Wavelab is the one I like to use. So I'll stagger it. But the thing is, right, if you have it on track, there's a reason I don't want to have it on track because I want it in one single lane. I want all of them to be staggered in one single lane, and I'll explain that now. So I'm going to press OK. Now, here are the lanes. Here's lane, still track 1. And here's lane 2 and lane 1. You can hide the lanes by doing that. I don't know why you would want to do that, but here's what stagger formation looks like. Now there is a problem child, which I'll talk about in a second. But you'll see that now we have all the tracks in one track under each lane separately, which is cool. And the reason you want to do that is because of the processing. When you processing in Wavelab, you can process, obviously, use the master section, which will do everything, but you don't want to master an album all together because they all will be mixed slightly differently, and you were trying to get them to sound like they're on the same album. So we want to process them separately, not all together. I will do my all-together mastering a bit later. So generally in your standard version of or standard layout of Wavelab, you'll have the master section and the inspector. I didn't like it there. I like it up here. So here's my inspector. And on the inspector, you have, if I click on a clip over here, for example, it will show me clip processes I can do. So every single clip will have a different process. For example, if I want to just have an EQ on this first clip, and then if I go to the second clip, it's not there because it's only applying to that particular clip, right? Then track will apply to the whole track. And this is why I like to have them in lanes, because even though they are separate, they are in different lanes. And if I go on track, this comes with really cool built-in things that you have. For example, a de-esser which I do use a lot, and denoising I may use depending on what I'm doing. And then you also get vocal exciters and reverbs and things like that on here if you want to get it to fit together. Usually there's a bit of S-ing that I like to remove from some recordings, especially with super high crazy microphones. For example, a lot of the voices were recorded on a Rode NT2A, and they have quite a lot of S-ing on them. So I use a de-esser, and I'll change these according to how I want to have it de-essed in the initial stage, which will affect every single clip. In our case, the whole album, which is quite useful. So that's why I like to have it on track. Then the output is where I'll put my last stage of limiting and my last bits of processing that will affect everything, very much like what happens here. The difference is this is applying, it's kind of going in order, and this will remain here if you close Wavelab and bring it open again in a different session. So it's not something, I don't use this pretty much unless I'm using it for my dither. But you can also add dither here, I guess, but there is that. Cool, so that's kind of the main layouts of how to import your audio files into Wavelab. And now we have to deal with this problem child. So I had a problem, for some reason, I don't know why, but this particular track doesn't like to be imported into Wavelab, and I don't know why. I don't know why. It's weird. So what I did to remedy that, but it's weird because it can be imported in Wavelab as in the audio editor. So what I did to do that is I would right-click next in this file group. Under here we have our montage. Over here we can right-click, and we can go open an audio file. Not a montage, audio file. So we got to go projects, and we got to go get master files, original mixes, and then we will bring in this, and you can see it actually reads it. We open it, and it brings it up in Wavelab, and it shows you all the metadata built into it and stuff like that. And then what I would do is that I would upsample this in my resample. I'll upsample this to 96. I would then X render it out, and then in here I would replace this audio file with the revised mix, which is what I did before, and then open it over there, and there it is. Very strange why it does that. I don't know why it's doing that. Sometimes there are just bugs in the system. Right, so that is that. So now, while I have this open, I can now show you the difference between the montage and the audio editor. You can see audio editor and montage over there. If I, for example, go and into this section, now there's two deletes on Wavelab. You can highlight a section, so like this, and press delete, and it will delete it and truncate the whole thing. Or you can highlight it and press backspace, and it will just delete the section that you're in and leave the space open. Now, if I go back to the montage, nothing happened, which is fine. But if I if I delete that, if I backspace it, clear that area, it's now deleted that area as well, which makes it destructive because this is affecting the actual audio file. Now, I don't want to do that. So this is destructive and this is non-destructive. I can do the same thing here and nothing will happen. So that's the difference between the montage and the audio editor. You don't want the audio editor. I don't like working in the audio editor because you are affecting the main file, essentially, which I don't want to do. But what I do in here is the main corrections of things. So, for example, if I have a problem with the audio not fitting nicely, or there's a click or pop, I can correct it in here. So the first thing I want to do is go to the analysis tool, global analysis, and I can get a rough idea of what's going on here. I can see that I'm true peaking quite high. It's barely anywhere, but it's still a bit high. I can check my loudness. I'm sitting at minus 12.6 LUFS, which is a bit loud for Spotify. If you know anything about Spotify, they like it at minus 12 and minus 1 peak limit. So we need to fix both of those, and we can check off our DC offset over here. We've got very little DC offset. DC offset, if you don't know, is the offset of a face on the left and right. And what you want to do is make them essentially straighten it out. I'm not going to really go deep into what DC offset is exactly, but it is something that a small detail that can be easily fixed, and it will improve the quality of your audio. And then we have errors, and it's just detected errors. So I'll show you what the errors are in a second. So if we go, so that's my first thing. I'm checking at what I still need to get up to and things like that. I'm going to go into correction, and I'm going to say detect all errors, and it's going to take a few seconds, and it'll go through the whole thing and see if there are in fact any errors. I don't think there will be. There might be, but you never know. Nope, no errors. But if an error does come up, it usually comes up in a little square, like a green block, and it's usually a pop or a click or something like that. But these tracks have already been cleaned. They've gone through RX and things like that to get rid of all those type of things. So I do it separately before I do the import, just because I'm weird that way. Let's just go with that. So there won't be errors, but if you do have an error, you can just correct the errors if you need to. Sometimes an error could be like a stick from a drummer clicking, and you don't want to remove that. Just make sure you go listen to the really bad errors and see what happens. And the next thing I'll do is remove the DC offset. And there's no substantial DC to remove, obviously, because like we said, it was like 0.00001%, which is so minuscule. Wavelab's just saying, don't waste my time. So yeah, and then once that's done, I'll save it, and that will then destructively fix all the problems that you had in the other track. All right. Cool. So now that we would do that to all the tracks, by the way, and that's kind of how it goes. So now that we have our audio fixed, all the corrections made, and all the tracks into the montage, we can now start with the mastering process of quality control. And we'll continue with it because we're already starting quality control. But my main issue you can see it immediately. This track is a lot quieter than this track. This track is quite like it keeps going up. This one starts loud and then ends soft, and so all these levels are very different. So what we want to do to start off with, because we go to master for a specific online system, is we want to get to a baseline where they're all kind of starting at the same level. And the great thing about Wavelab is that you can actually do this in one, like a couple clicks of the button. And how to do that is in process. I'm going to go to the meta normalizer. And in the meta normalizer, if you know what a normalizer is, a meta normalizer, meta just means many. So I don't bother with the audio montage output and the master section. I will only deal with the clips individually. Meta, many clips. So you get different options here. If you have two songs you're mastering, like two singles, if you want to match the loudest clip, you can match the other clip. Or if you want to equalize the peak levels to start off there. Personally, I don't do that, and I like to match a specific loudness, and I will match my -16 LUFS because I want to give myself 2 dBs of headroom for my own limiting. I want to do my own limiting. I don't want to do anyone else. I don't want to use this as my limiter, shall we say. And I'm going to use the top of the loudness range. So essentially the range of loudness units that you are using, it will use that. And the loudness range you'll see a bit later when I press the button to say go. I'll show you what I mean. And then ignore peaks because I'll set my own peak level. And then the one thing that's quite important that you must keep in mind is change pre-gain, because this will automatically be in post-gain, which is kind of difficult to work out a bit later, but you want this in pre-gain, so you're affecting the gain before you start doing processing. Okay, so once you have that, you can get there. Go and press apply, and it will render now. Cool. Now they're all sitting at -16 LUFS at the top of the loudness range. And remember, I could say you will see the loudness range earlier. If you look very closely, you'll see that there's a line there, and then space between them. That is the top of the loudness range, and it's getting it to average out at that point. Hence why all the tracks now look fairly even. So that's a good place to start. Now everything's sitting at -16 LUFS. What I will do now is start with my metadata. I would actually start with metadata because I just want to get it out of the way. It gets really confusing for some people to do metadata. But metadata is not actually that complicated. If we go to the metadata tab, you'll see that it's pretty empty. If I click on something, nothing happens. If I click on something else, nothing happens. And this is because we have to actually import the stuff. So the first thing to do is to put the track titles, the track names, and all those good things in there. Now you could go into and edit this one by one, which is really silly. I wouldn't suggest doing that. You can go to your CD. This is not CD as in CD in the modern sense of the word. It's just a way of saying this is where your text is going to be, your CD text and your metadata text and stuff like that. At the moment, there's nothing in here because we haven't named anything, but we have got our clip names over here. But so what I want to do is I want to rename my clips to get rid of this 96, which I'll do because I don't want to have that in my CD text. So if I go and just delete all these things, and I'm not going to do all of them, but it's now got the names of the clips in, which is really cool. And if I go to now CD text over here, and I want to add all my text to these things in a much easier way, we can go use our CD wizard. Our CD wizard, we want to generate markers. Obviously, we want to mark the starting and ending points of all the tracks. So I start with generate CD markers. So my CD markers, I will create markers at clip boundaries, left and right, obviously. And I'll use the splice markers to separate the different clips. So you have a start and start at the same time. And you want to create, and I don't want to create crossfade points. I'll do that myself. And then keep locked CD track markers. Yes, that will keep there. So you don't want to change them at all. Now, the CD marker naming is going to be as clip because we've renamed all our clips and we don't want to end marker name. We're not going to adjust the pause, and we are going to quantize to a CD frame, just gaps between markers and sounds as CD frames. Yes. Okay, so with the CD frame thing, just before you do this, a CD frame, if you do print CDs, you want to make sure that you don't have your CD frames off. Otherwise, when they actually render the CDs, it's going to sound not at the same time as as you've marked it out. So before we do that, let's do this. I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to go to ripple mode and just set global. What this means is that everything I select like for example this clip, if I move this clip, everything after this clip is going to move, but nothing behind it will move, like for example like that, and so on. So just keep that on global for now, and I want to go to the beginning and just move this up by about 200 milliseconds. Let's just go in, because the CD frame is going to probably be a bit earlier than that, so I just want to move that up to that CD frame. So now I'm going to go back into the CD wizard. Oopsie. CD wizard. Go back into the CD wizard, and I want to I don't want to adjust the gaps per se, but I do want to quantize markers to the nearest CD frame. This is also where you can get your ISRC codes. If you don't have ISRC codes, don't put them in. For me, in my case, I do have ISRC codes that I can use. I'm just going to find them quickly. If I go into my ISRC and I go look at my ISRC codes list, I have a list of all the ISRC codes which are over here, of all the tracks that I've mastered before, and I will then go from the next one. So the last one was 80 and the next one's going to be 81. So in that case, I'd copy that, go into Wavelab and generate my ID codes, and at this last part, I'll just have 00081. Oopsie. And that's where it will be. When you generate ISRC codes, it will cascade them. So the first track will be 81, the second one will be 82, the next one will be 83, and so on and so forth. If you don't know what an ISRC code is an international standard recording code, and what it does, it's essentially the watermark of a specific track, and It is the thing that will protect your music from being stolen. Kind of, not really, but kind of. It's a tracking number. It's if you play it on Spotify, if someone plays it in Australia, for example, the ISRC code will pick it up on Spotify and then credit you your royalty because it tracked the ISRC code that has been played somewhere. A UPC code or EAN code is a barcode that you get for a whole product. So every single track will have its own ISRC, but this entire album will have one UPC code put in there. I'm not going to do any of those because the reason I'm not going to do an ISRC code is because on Spotify it's going to give me one anyway. And where I am in the world, I don't want to really use the local ISRC codes because I don't trust them. So I won't use them. Anyway, so I will then create this. And now it has, you can see that now in my metadata, in my clips, remember we named those first 3 clips. In the CDs, it's named those as well. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of these guys. And also the track numbers, just getting rid of them. And the reason for this is for the metadata that I'm going to add in a second. Oopsie, there. Just make sure this is right because this will be embedded into your music and to change it is going to be fun. You don't want to do this twice. So just make sure it's right the first time. Okay, so there's all the CD names and now we have the markers. Once we have the markers, it's quite easy. We can go back up to the top here and then go back to right next to the CD wizard, there is this one called CD text editor. And what we want to do is now add the album details. Now, the case in this one, the album is called Life of the Daydreamer. Right, and the performer in this case is the guy, Geoffrey Diver and Nastassja Anderson. Fantastic. Composer is me, and I like to abbreviate mine to that. Cool. So once it's there, you can plonk that there, plonk that there. What this does, it just copies the text to the tracks. So that's useful. And then once I have that done, I just make sure there's a long story about these type of ASCII. If you have funny symbols, there's some great videos done by Justin Perkins on wavelabhelp.com that you can go see how he does this under his montage section. But there we go. So now I'm going to go to the next one, page down, and now it's still got all the things. And from here, we can say copy CD marker name to all the CD track titles. Boom. Let me out. And then you can see that all of these are done. Fantastic. Now, I don't like to really do the rest, and to be honest, no one else does either. So we just leave those blank. CD ID it's only one CD, so this ID will probably be one or a specific ID that you need to get from your producing or label house or something like that. It depends. But yeah, there we go. Cool. So now you can see that our CD text is in. And ISRCs are not there, but they would be there if we had to. If we had to see the UPC code, you can just click it there and type it in there as well. Great. So now we are starting to look very cool. We've done most of our quality control, and we have done most of our metadata. Now, we still haven't embedded the metadata. We still need to put it in. So to do that, it's quite simple. We go to a metadata, edit metadata, and then you get this chap. This is the metadata input component of Wavelab. And quite frankly, the most important ones is probably ID3 that's just found on the ID3 and /iTunes. This is the most important one. The reason for is most players use this. There are some that uses other ones, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. XML is used a lot for some, well, not used a lot, but there are some softwares that use XML to when you print CDs. CART, I don't really know. There are a bunch of the broadcast functions These things are, you know, if you're in the US, you need the US ID and so on and so forth. So how do you go about doing this? Is quite simply, I have already done this before, and I usually save it as a preset, and I'll do one for now, just so you can see how this works. So in ID3, under the title, now this is going to be the title of the whole album, of the track, sorry, not the album. It's going to be the title of the track. So under here, the drop-down menu, you get 4 options, essentially. You get custom variable code, which means you customize your own one. You could do this. It just takes a very long time to do it. And I wouldn't do the custom ones. The auto ones are the ones that make more sense and are a little bit easier to follow. So we got to get an auto variable code, not value. The value is a number. So this will be like 12. This will be like the title of the names and things like that. We'll get an actual value. We want the code. So in our case, the title is going to be under CD track, and it's going to be title because it's the CD track title. Boom, and there it is. Now it will automatically grab the title that you filled in a bit earlier, and then you're sorted. So you would do that for all of these things. So I'm going to load my preset, and that will bring up all the ones that I think are quite important. Subtitle, not really. The main things for me is that you have your title in, your album in, your lead performers, and your whoever performed it. Like your composer, you don't really need to add it. I mean, you could if you really wanted to, but that's usually for classical musicians or jazz musicians. That's really important. They like those things. And then the year, this year, and then the track number is a bit of a weird one, because you would think, oh, it's track 1. Yes, it is track 1 if you're doing track 1, but you want your track index. In this case, it's track index of, let's say, disc 1, track 1, which is this one. And then I put a slash, and then I'll have the number of tracks overall. So if it's track 1 of 12. Here you would also add your ISRC. I haven't added it here again because I will add it in my distributor a bit later. But if you wanted to add it, you could just do it this way. You go to auto variable code, CD track, ISRC code, and there it is. Done. Cool. And once you have all of that, you press OK. And then it will come up, and you'll notice that artwork came up because I used the preset already. But if you didn't use a preset like I have, you can go to picture, and then you can go add a picture and add the file that your picture, and then you tell it what type of picture it is, and then you add it. There it's there. And pretty much all of them have just the basic information in there, so it doesn't this year has doesn't like it, so you'll have to do it like that, I guess. Right, so there we go. So we have all the information that we need. The metadata is in, and now we want to finish the quality control side. Now remember, we gave this 200 milliseconds before we started. You'll see that it's given us quite a bit of space, and we are still in ripple mode. So if I grab, not that one, if I grab this and drag it to 0, that's where I wanted. It's then all happy to go and ready to go. And now, last thing I want to do, now that it is on 0, I'm going to go back to the CD Wizard. No, I don't want to print a DDP. I'm going to go back to the CD Wizard, and I want to requantize. I'm not going to generate things. I just want to requantize and press apply, and then it has requantized those CD markers at that frame. Fantastic. Next thing to do is to listen to the beginnings and ends of tracks. You can see there's quite a lot of space there. And we would now add our phase. We got to listen to the back and ends of each track, and we got to adjust the phase. So I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to show you how it looks once it's done. So I'm going to deselect and quit without saving. And then I'm going to open the other montage. All right, cool. So now if you go look at the beginning, we have a very slight fade in, and it's exponential. And the reason for that is, I don't know, it just sounds a bit more natural than a linear one. But I've also cut off a whole bunch of time at the end. I just want this to fizzle out. And then I've adjusted all these markers to make sure that they are even. Then also, if you look down, I've added some reference tracks. Now the reference track, I said earlier that we've got 2 reference tracks. You can listen to one or the other by pressing the listening tool. To add a reference track, you just click here and say add a reference track. I've had them in 2 separate lanes because I have 2 different reference tracks, and I quite honestly don't like having a million tracks over and over again. But once we've done our quality control, we are doing a whole bunch of fades in and fades out. Well, the mixing engineer has done most of the job for you, but essentially what you want to do, why you still want to fade, even though the mixing engineer has done it for you, is because let's take this last track, for example. Let's just bring it out slightly and show you what's happening on the end. You'll see that the track kind of ends there, right? And when it ends there, it will fade out slightly. But if I zoom in quite a lot, you'll see that there's stuff happening there, even in the super silence. And that's just digital noise and interference that you want to get rid of. So that's why I put in the fade. And this one was going on a bit long. So for all the other tracks, it happens in the beginning and the end. And with the fade, even if it's a tiny, tiny little fade, it could be like a few microseconds. So when you start adding processing, it will pop. Especially if you use something like a compressor, it'll pop when it hits the beginning part because the track starts there, and when it actually hits the beginning of the track, it will spike, and you don't want it to spike. So these little fades at the beginning of the end will just make sure that doesn't happen. So once the fades are in, then you are ready to go, and you can then save this as a new montage. And remove this little underscore because you've done your quality control. You've now made sure your track is ready to go, and start your mastering process on the next montage that you create from this. So to do that is quite easy. You'll just, once you've done your render, you can render out these as your 96Ks. And then in your options, you can say create an audio montage from the result. And that is where you can start doing your processing. So I hope that is a clear introduction to how Wavelab works in terms of its setup and how you set up for a mastering album. And I will do another video after this on how to actually go about mastering these tracks.